I am Jalyn. I am a board certified lactation consultant, and today we're going to talk about some reasons why you might not breastfeed. So, the first reason is you have planned and executed the baby shower with all the bells and whistles, all the frills. It's got great videography. Everybody loved it. It was like fabulous. But let's see, you're 8 months and you haven't taken a breastfeeding class or a childbirth education class. So, first of all, a childbirth education class is important, especially if it's your first baby, because you want to know what the process of childbirth is like. So, regardless of whether you are planning for a natural childbirth or if you're one of those people that are like, I'm about to get that epidural as soon as I walk in the door, even if you have a doula, you want to be informed about the basics of childbirth, because when you go in empowered with information, you will be less stressed out, more calm, and when you're calm and you're more relaxed, that makes labor happen more naturally and a little bit easier. Whereas if you don't know what's going on, you don't know about any of the processes of when the contractions are going to intensify and things that you can do, walk around and squat and use a birth ball and things that can help you get through labor quicker and with less pain. Knowing those things really makes a difference, not only in your birth experience, but also in your breastfeeding experience. When mothers have a lot of interventions during the labor, like Pitocin induction, epidural, especially if they have an epidural and they have it for many hours, it does impact the baby. If you've heard otherwise, it's not true. It does impact the baby. So when you are having these interventions, maybe even you have a long pushing phase, a long labor in general, all these things can impact breastfeeding. They can impact how well the baby latches or if the baby latches at all. So your childbirth experience can have an impact on your breastfeeding experience. Now I'll tell you a little story. When I had my first son, I had taken a childbirth education class and I didn't hire a doula, which I regret to this day. But I had taken a childbirth education class. My partner had taken that with me, a 6-week class and everything. So we thought we were prepared. And I was planning on having a natural childbirth in a birth center, which is similar to home. But what happened was I get to the birth center. I was in early labor, get to the birth center, and they take my temperature and say, oh, you have a fever. You cannot birth in this birth center. You going to the hospital. Stat. That was really traumatizing because I wasn't planning on having to go to the hospital. We knew what our plan A was, but we hadn't created a birth plan B. And so I would definitely encourage you to not only take a childbirth education class, but create a birth plan or birth wishes, however you want to think about it, so that you know, like, what would I do if I don't get my plan A? How do I make sure I still can come out of this process feeling empowered, feeling like I made the best decisions that I could given the situation and that kind of thing. So I ended up having to get induced, but I ended up being able to push my son out. And even though at that time they weren't doing a lot of the things that can help initiate breastfeeding, like they didn't do skin to skin, he was able to latch on and we ended up breastfeeding for 2.5 years. But having that childbirth education, knowing what to expect, definitely helped. Now, I didn't take a breastfeeding course because I didn't even know one existed at that time. Again, this was like 20 years ago. But I did read a very comprehensive book, and I still have it on my bookshelf, but I don't have access to it. But it's called The Womanly Art of Breastfeeding by the La Leche League. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Leche League, but they have been around since like the 1950s. It's an organization. It's international now. But it was started in the 1950s by a couple of women who were breastfeeding at a time when nobody was breastfeeding. That was probably the lowest time for breastfeeding. And so, of course, they needed that camaraderie and that support to be able to reach their goals. And so, obviously, it's grown over the last 60, 70 years. In any case, I read that book cover to cover, and that was the thing that I looked at. I studied for really the first 4 weeks, until I got to the point where I was able to breastfeed without pain, because I did have pain. I did have sore nipples and things like that. But studying that book, going over it over and over again, looking at the pictures, that's what helped me. I read this before I had the baby, so I knew what a good latch is supposed to look like. I knew different positions. I knew how to tell if my baby was getting enough milk. So there was never a point when I was worried that I wasn't producing enough or that I needed to supplement with formula. Never a point, because I had that education prior to breastfeeding. So that's number one. I definitely think if you don't do anything else, please take a childbirth education class and a breastfeeding class. Those two classes are definitely worth the investment. And I would say that it should be a bigger investment than a baby shower, because all that stuff, your baby doesn't care about that. Your baby wants to get fed and needs to be fed. And I know that if you're watching me right now, you want your baby to be well nourished, optimally nourished with your own milk. Investing that time and energy into being informed, being educated is super, super important. So another sign that you might not be successful with breastfeeding is you've hired a doula, but you haven't hired a lactation consultant. Maybe you've done your classes, you're a couple of steps ahead of the game, and you've hired a doula. You've invested however much, maybe $1,000 on a doula, but you haven't looked into hiring a lactation consultant. Now, prenatal lactation consults can be super, super helpful, even if you've taken a breastfeeding class, so that you know, based on your history, your medical history, your social history, your goal, you can get recommendations as far as knowing what your chances are of breastfeeding successfully and just strategies for helping you reach whatever your breastfeeding goals are. Getting a prenatal lactation consult can help you learn more about how you, specifically you, can be more successful with breastfeeding. Yeah, hire a lactation consultant. Typically, they'll do 30 to 60-minute prenatal consultations. Of course, if you wait till after you've had the baby, a consultation may be 1 to 2 hours. But find out who the lactation consultants are in your area. Check them out. See if you may even want to call 1 or 2 of them, ask them some questions. If you just want to ask them more about their practice and just get a sense of if you may want to work with them, do that. Ask for recommendations. What you don't want to do is wait until after you've had the baby and then you're like, it's not working. I need to find somebody ASAP. And then you're like, SOS, can you come tomorrow? And nobody's available when you need them. And it depends on where you live. If you're in an urban area like I am, there usually are consultants available. So just look into the whole thing so you don't have to be stressed out after you have the baby trying to figure out like who you can see and who's available and their prices. And speaking of pricing, that's another thing. If you're going to invest $1,000 in a doula, surely you can invest another like $500 in a lactation consultant. So instead of spending that $500 on a baby shower or on that fancy crib, tuck that money aside for a couple lactation visits. Depending on where you live, a lactation consultation can cost anywhere from $100 for a virtual video consultation to $250. If you're in like a really expensive city like New York or LA, it might run closer to $250, $300 per consultation. But I would say the average is $150 to $200 for an in-person consultation. So yeah, check out who your consultants are in your area, what their pricing is, and budget for that. You may also find that your insurance may cover lactation consultation. So, and if you have that insurance and you know that it's covered, you can just call up your lactation consultant or text her and say, hey, I had this question. Can we get on a video call? I did actually 6 video consultations. I'm thinking of one mom, and she breastfed her babies, both her babies, for over a year. The second one, during the pandemic, she had her son in April of 2020. And of course, no one was doing in-person home visits, lactation home visits at that time. And so we did all of her consultations over video. And I maybe did one like when she was a couple weeks in, and this was her second baby. So she had successful experience breastfeeding her first, but she had different questions for the second baby, because just because you breastfed successfully for the first baby doesn't mean the second one is going to be easier. I found that to be my own personal experience, where this first one was relatively easy. After the first 3 weeks, like, it was pretty smooth sailing. Second one really threw me off. Like, she was totally different. I had issues with pain, latch for like almost 6 weeks before we got things under control. So again, even if it's your second, third, fourth baby, you don't assume that you're not going to have any challenges just because you breastfed another baby before. So I say all that to say, budget that money for a lactation consultant. If you don't have insurance, there's also a company called Lactation Network. And I'm going to put a link below with their information. But you can check and see if they take your insurance. You fill out a form, they'll check your insurance, and they'll let you know, like, within 24 hours if your insurance covers lactation visits. So I'm going to stop here. If you like this video, please subscribe, hit the like button, leave a comment, and let us know what your experience was like with breastfeeding. And I'll see you in the next video.